Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening. You will see quite a few things today on the screen and also hear from our distinguished panelists. Above all, our keynote speaker, Binyavanga, who's come all the way from Kenya and will be introduced a bit later on. And our panel discussion will have four other members: Juliana Rufus from Al Jazeera, Ishbel Matheson, who will chair this and who's from ODI, and Jack Lundy, who used to be with Save the Children and now with Oxfam, and last but not least, Mariam Jam from, British-born, but originally from Senegal, I believe, and who's just set up a infotech hub in Kinshasa. Is that correct? So right on, really, everyone very much involved with the issues that we're about to talk about this evening. It'll be a question and answer session, so I hope there'll be many, many questions from you. I know many of you are from the development world. There's been a huge response to this evening's event, so really thank you very much for joining us. And I also hope that you've had the opportunity to see what it's all about with the exhibition. Really strong pictures. Already I think we've had a very good feedback from people talking about not just the images, but the text that goes along with them. The evening will end at 9:45, so there'll be plenty of time afterwards for those who haven't seen the exhibition. And this is being filmed, so I would like to remind everyone if they would turn off their mobile phones, if you haven't already, and equally not to take any photographs or use flash photography during this evening's event. My name's Nick Danziger. Some people might wonder what I am and what I do. A lot of people would say I'm a photographer or a filmmaker or author. But one of the reasons I was very keen to be here tonight when I was invited is that above all, I think I'm a storyteller. I'm passionate about bringing people's voices from often distant and remote places, but equally from within the United Kingdom, to new audiences that might not be aware of how other people live, sometimes very close geographically and sometimes very far. So I have made many documentaries, written books, and now particularly concentrate on photography, but always attached with people's voices. So I should add that it's with great pleasure to be here as a guest of ODI and Photo Voice, because I'm also patron of Photo Voice. It seems a natural fit, because I believe participatory photography is one way of telling those stories from people, lands close by and far away. As you saw in the text said, bad news about development often crowds out the good. And yet, despite the global challenges, we do live in an age today where progress is being made, sometimes dramatically, and other times maybe less so. ODI's Development Progress Project aims to measure, understand, and communicate where and how that progress has been made. And particularly in this set of images that you see in the exhibition hall, I think that's very evident. And the project also brings together case studies, opinion, and in-depth research with a range of supporting content, including infographics, animation, and photography. So I don't know if you've been on ODI's website, but there's some amazing clips which I think generate a lot of interest from maybe people who wouldn't be associated with the worlds of development. Photo Voice, for those of you who don't know about Photo Voice, is a UK-based charity that runs participatory photography projects around the world to amplify the voices of people afflicted and affected by social issues in campaigning and communications, and making them active agents for social change. And that equally is not, again, just in far-off places, but also here in the United Kingdom. This work brings insights into often overlooked perspectives and experiences, and has lasting impact through the skills it leaves in the field and the dialogues it enables between decision makers and communities. And I think that's one of the remarkable aspects that I've witnessed, certainly in the work of Photo Voice, is that there is a legacy. After Photo Voice leaves, the participants are able to use those skills that they have learned from the trainers. And I think during that whole course, the whole community benefits from a self-esteem, and also that the idea that there are people out there listening and that they have a means of communicating things that are very important to them, which otherwise would not have been heard. So it is a slight plea. I know you are here and you didn't have to pay for a ticket, so I would urge many of you to consider joining up as a Photo Voice member. It's £50 annually. £20 for students. And for those of you interested in photography, there's a whole range of interesting aspects of photography that I think would certainly elicit a lot of interest from you. And we have here from Photo Voice also see Jenny Matthews, a photographer who's been out, and many other members of Photo Voice. I think also what is interesting about both Photo Voice and ODI is that they try to also get away from the statistics. Statistics tell us one side of the story, and it's often the official side. It doesn't really tell us about the lives of individuals, what we would normally say grassroots support and ideas. And it's often been the case in the past that development takes place without taking into account how people feel about what we bring to them. And I think this project from ODI and Photo Voice does exactly this. It brings out their perspectives and what does work and what it feels like to be living in their communities and to have an input from outside. Photo Voice ran these photography workshops in 6 countries to give the skills and the voice to those members. I think you saw the 6 countries that were listed: China, Ethiopia, Ghana, Nepal, Peru, and Tunisia. Those all feature in the exhibition. And in each country, participants were asked to consider a different area of development, the progress that they have experienced and how that change has affected their own life and that of their wider community. By introducing photography to those at the grassroots of development, this project gives voice to a range of perspectives on what is working and why it is working. The photo stories created by these grassroots photographers will complement wider research and in-depth analysis undertaken by Overseas Development Institute to better understand and therefore provide further development and improvement within the development spheres that are necessary. Myself, I've been very involved in some of these very issues: maternal mortality, universal primary education, extreme poverty, all issues linked with those 8 Millennium Development Goals. And this really began as a commission from World Vision 8 years ago. I know many of you from organizations that I've worked from, in fact, Oxfam, the International Committee of the Red Cross. But this particular project really grabbed my attention because the Millennium Development Goals, as many of you well, was a 15-year project which is due to end this September and will be followed by the Sustainable Development Goals. So I think what we are about to hear, and certainly I hope we will have many questions, what will become of the MDGs? Because my personal experience is very different from the facts and figures that I've been reading. And what you will see here was a picture taken of Abbas in 2005, a child, 13 years old, going down a mine shaft, 23 meters deep, to dig for gold. He never found gold. He spent 5 years going down that mine shaft. His boss died the previous year to taking this photograph. Abbas works 363 days a year. Usually no more than 2 days off, 9 hours a day, risking life and limb. I don't particularly want to name the countries because I think often we point out one individual country, but child labor, extreme poverty exists in so many countries still around the world today. And 5 years later, I decided it would be good to go back and find the very same people again to find out what had or hadn't changed in their lives. In Abbas's case, he was no longer working down the mine. He had decided to marry, and he had told me, would I like to meet his wife and his mother? And I returned to his village to discover Aisha, his wife, in the family home. To my horror, Abbas, who was then 20, had decided to marry a 13-year-old. There wasn't a single school in that region in 2010. And it turned out to be very common in the village. 25% of girls under 15, a quarter of them, were married. I went back last December to follow up the story. Every 5 years I'm returning to the same people. Abbas has been forced to go back into the minefields and to dig for gold. And his wife, now 18, Aisha, wasn't able to give birth. So he's taken another wife, also age 13, who he bought off his father-in-law for 120 US dollars. Everyone knows it's wrong. Everyone knows it's illegal within that particular country. But the father explained his position that he needed the money. He needed to buy some sheep as an investment to be able to support the rest of his family. And then he fell ill, and half of that money went. And Abbas has not been able to fulfill the complete payment, so the wife hasn't yet been transferred into his family home. And I mention this story as well because the story relates also to maternal health. I photographed in 2005, the original commission from World Vision, Husseini and Husseina. Their mother had died in childbirth. It took the mother 3 days to raise the money for the petrol for the ambulance to take her 72 kilometers. When she arrived at the hospital, she had, I discovered only this year when I went through the hospital archives, she had severe eclampsia and triple edema. And the hospital didn't have an ultrasound machine, and they didn't know that there was a twin on the way. So she gave birth to the first child who needed reanimating. And when she gave birth to the second child, she died. She died in childbirth. The aunt didn't have the money to take the two children back home, the bus fare. The hospital had to make a collection. In 2010, there was progress. The government had instituted that everyone who visits a clinic there had to pay a tiny, tiny percentage of the visiting fee for the petrol for the ambulance. But this year I went back, and that system has collapsed. People now have to find the money to be able to pay for the petrol for the ambulance. In the most populous province of the country, there are only 2 working ambulances. 4 no longer work. I found the ambulance driver, and that day he had to borrow the tire off the vehicle from the gendarmerie to be able to use the ambulance. And when I returned to that hospital, when I went through the archives, Husseina and Husana's mother, I found her entry into the accident and emergency list. The mother was 14 years old. And as I went through that book, page after page, I read the ages of, I can't say the women, the girls, 14, 15, 17, 17, 33. And most of the women had lost children. And what I haven't told you about this story, when I returned in 2010, Husseini and Husseina, I returned to find the aunt. I didn't know I was going to find this project, but I found Fatima, the aunt, very quickly. And in great excitement, I said, "Where are Husseini and Husseina?" And she said, "They died after your visit." She didn't know the exact amount of time. I've worked it out as about 5 months later. And she explained the reason that they died was because she couldn't afford to buy the milk powder for the babies. These are not the statistics that we read about. And this year, in this particular country, which is now a fragile state, thanks to World Vision and other organizations, foundations, I was able to go back. I had to have a security detachment. And most of the local people, when they saw the security detachment behind me, thought that I was one of the Al-Mujair group. So severe psychosis, but also to say that very little has changed. This is a picture. I don't know if there are any teachers amongst you, but another statistic, yeah, well, how many children do you teach? 25 in your class. So this is a country which the statistics will tell you they reached MDG 2 well before the target date. But when you go into the classroom, I counted in each and every classroom at least 100 children. There were 125 children in this classroom. And even the local education board said, what kind of quality can we provide? And chalk is rationed. And while school is free in many of the countries that many of us visit, the uniforms and the pens and pencils, the school, as it were, fourniture, the pens and papers are just not available because the families don't have the money. And this is another story from another part of the world, Honduras. Franklin. Well, I mention it because it is now one of the most violent countries in the world. This was a picture of him taken age 7. Aged 11, he was one of the top students in the school, and he was the top student in mathematics, hoped to go on to become a banker, I think probably a bank clerk. His grandmother said, "I'm not sure if we can afford the bus fare to send him to the secondary school." And I returned this January to discover that he's now a gang member. A gang member because the bus fare wasn't available to him. There are positive stories from Latin America in particular. This is a country where both through NGOs, local government, and national government, schools have been built. So in 2005, when I visited, there wasn't a school, there wasn't a clinic for the women to visit. When schooling was available, it was really for the boys. I think it's remarkable in two ways. Today, in all of the villages that I initially visited, there are schools. In 2010, I returned to find them. This year, they've built basketball courts. So progress can be achieved with that connection between all parties. Equally, I would like to say that this girl, Eugenia, was not at school when I took this picture, aged 10. Her father sold half the llamas so that he could buy a plot of land in a city to send her to school. So again, individuals are also very keen for progress within their own scope and abilities without aid from outside. So I think that was my perspective, very brief. And I would also like to say that these stories, you're very numerous here today, but to try and get these stories into mainstream media is increasingly difficult. Those of you who are photographers here today will realize and know just how celebrity and lifestyle issues have just taken over our press. Look at any UK colour supplement and see what is on the covers today. And although I've had and been very fortunate the support of NGOs and foundations in this type of work, it is a constant struggle and battle to raise the funding. And many of you know that from your own institutions, not only getting the press interested, but providing the wherewithal to go and do these stories. I think today we think that everyone can take a photograph, but my answer to that is if I handed a violin out to you, could you play a tune? And I am often commissioned, like many of the photographers in here, to go and speak to your communications people, those of you who are in development agencies, to train your communications people. That doesn't necessarily produce a telling and strong photograph. And I think that's the difficulty today, is that we think that citizen journalism, people with a smartphone or a small camera can produce the kind of work and stories that are telling stories. I don't really believe that is the case. And I think just to go back to the exhibition here today and why the relationship between Photo Voice and ODI works so well is you have two professional organizations working together. Photo Voice spend an enormous amount of human hours and investment training people to bring the stories out of their communities in a way that can entrance us, engage us, and educate us about their lives. So with that, I think it's time to move on. I would also like to say, if I may, ODI, I'd like to really thank Matt Dorr. I don't know where he is, but there we are in the front row, because he's leaving Photo Voice after 8 years. He's traveled to 15 countries, I think, on projects. He helped put this evening together. He's been a bedrock within Photo Voice. And if you would all just a short round of applause for Matt for all the tremendous work that he's done. I will now briefly introduce Binyavanga, and an extraordinary author and publisher, someone who engages with local people as well, to mentor them, I believe, to try and get them also to talk about their lives. I tried to purchase your book, How to Write About Africa. It's a terrible thing to say. In some ways, it's very pleasing. I think it wasn't available on Amazon, so it's heartbreaking when you have people who want to, when they want to buy your book, purchase your book. But when you read the reviews and what it's about, I would say that all of you working in the worlds that we, I think, are all engaged in, it is absolutely a must-read. And equally, your memoir, One Day We'll Write About This Place, is also, I believe, extremely engaging. So I'm indebted to ODI and Photo Voice for bringing Kinyavanga here, because I hadn't understood or heard about you before. But also, I think it's very important to say he also reached the 100 most influential people in Time magazine. So I think a big round of applause for being here with us tonight, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. Oh, okay. I thought they're yours, I think. Now, I don't know what I'd expected. I sort of thought there'd be a giant portrait of David Livingstone staring at me and saying, "Are you the Kwashako baby I saved in Zambia?" I'm like, I don't know. I can't remember. So, I wanted to have a talk a little bit first about, I was asked to talk about imagery, the pictures, just what's my relationship to the word, the idea, where it's come from to me, and what it's come to mean. And so my first, I guess the first ones were government things on a national broadcaster, radio, rural progress for urban development, or rural electrification sort of thing in the days of sort of early Kenyan nationalism. A lot of those things came into schools, Grow Tree campaign, Go This campaign, all of those things. I had no idea through high school what an NGO was. I kind of had gotten a picture of NGO sort of Western development-y things, because we were members of a club in Nakuru, which used to be an old colonial club called the Rifali Sports Club, who, as all colonial clubs of the type, are regular subscribers to the Telegraph and the Sunday Times, where I had encountered many, many dying babies in Honduras. For some reason, the Kenyan newspapers never showed Kenyans. I don't know why. It always was someone in India or South America. Someone, then you're like, who are those people? Because if it may be the case that 50 meters away from where we were sitting, there was a child like that, but I had no signals to understand the Bear Pity campaign. Like this, if 1 pound and they die in the water tank, which is going to be done with 1 pound something for them to not die. And this was, so of course I would, as a child, you're very influenced by media. And global media then wasn't as big. There was a bit of BBC on radio. And so you're like, oh my God, you go home and tell your mom, we have to save this child in Honduras. Something like that. Then, my other relationship with development wasn't necessarily obvious. I've been talking about my dad a lot these days, since he died. But of course, that's what his work was. But he wasn't a development worker. He was a CEO of a farmers cooperative, which managed to serve thousands, maybe tens of thousands of farmers of pyrethrum. And in the old days when you used to use Johnson & Johnson or insecticides in your homes, the active ingredient came from Kenya, which grew like 80%. And for me, what I knew was there was this thing that was a small office and a small thing in Africa started during colonial times, and a young generation of people built that service, served thousands of farmers with fertilizer, research, seeding, until the point at which those farmers were very well paid, deals were made, and so on and so forth. But also, I witnessed my father retire at 55 and his life works collapse with little politics, not his. They're saying privatization. How do you privatize a farmers cooperative? Who are you going to privatize? But the buzzword had arrived around the same time IMF conditionalities arrived. Just privatize it. You Brits will know a bit about that. So they privatized it, and it went belly up, And there are 3 or 4 buyers in the world, because by this time, all these companies that make insecticide had all conglomerated and had agreed prices. So they are saying open it to a free market. Which free market? Agrivo and everyone else have tied these things up with contract spaces, like companies own territories. And Kenyan peripheral industry had deals with the territories. So when Johnson & Johnson said, hey, if you guys are saying privatize and you don't want our thing, we'll just go to the synthetics, which they did, as we were making privatization politics, thing went belly up. So the third one then was cotton. So this guy, so they're privatizing the cotton business. I'm on holiday, I've been yanked by my parents because I'm drinking too much to get busy. Are you doing something useful? And my dad, who's been doing this kind of work for a long time, is approached by this guy who's buying a cotton ginnery because the cotton thing had collapsed. Sort of somewhere in the middle of those IMF conditionalities and everything else, all these sorts of utilities were being told, ship up, or get efficient, so on and so forth. So this guy buys it and says, oh, Job, you've been managing this kind of thing for a long time, working with farmers, blah, blah, blah. I'll give you a share of this business. I've bid for it and won it. I've known you all this time. So make it work. So I'm put in a car to go and work with farmers and so on and so forth. And so there are 5 districts in Kenya and that were served or could be served by this ginnery. And these are areas that the climate, there are not that many crops that you can grow commercially because of whatever climatic issues and so on and so forth. And so cotton had been something relatively successful for the time that the system worked. So of course it was terrible going to see farmers who've lost everything. Some have cotton in their stores from 20 years before, after the thing collapsed, and then it was eaten by, corrupt people or government policy or IMF or whichever. Many, many reasons. Too many to come to in 20 minutes. But so we were going, because Kenya had a fairly extensive, I think maybe still has, and at the time it hadn't completely fallen in the privatization thing, farmers support network, right? Extension officers in every. So you go to see extension officers and say, which are the farmers who used to grow cotton? Can we go and see them and so on and so forth? Of course, it's a kind of complicated situation because you're kind of a private business needing this service. But the thing I found out was in some districts which had already very well settled farmers extension offices, we were easily taken to each farmer, each person had meetings, talk to them, will you buy, if you bring seed, how do you want it to work? Now, because this is a process of thinking about reactivating this ginnery, and cotton prices apparently were through the roof globally. Then we went to one district, and the narrative shifted. And this was in Thika, and very middle-class looking extension officers all had cars, and they were like, we're not living here until you pay us per diem. I didn't know what the word per diem was. They were like, no, you see, when we do work with Plan International, we are paid $100 to leave this office and do anything with a farmer. But don't you get a government salary? No. No dice, no deal, no conversation. Come back when you're ready to do this. So all of a sudden, I was like, this is now this transitionary time when all of a sudden the pity economy, the compassion economy, is now everywhere. And because this sort of transition with the idea that governments have collapsed and so care, charity, help those people, nameless, whatever, non-narrative, and the narrative even of that any other systems existed was now transitioning. 3 days later, we go to Thika town to see the district office, the district commissioner, who's in charge of the political officer district, the government officer in charge of the district. And he says, there are many regions of mine you can't go because for us we have a deal with Plan International that if you're going to see community development, that you go with the extension officer. He had a nice car parked outside. So before that time, if you had asked an average Kenyan student, what job are you going to apply for when you go and study? Where is their money? It used to be engineering, medicine, law. There used to be like 5, the prime ones. Then sort of late 90s, international development started to hit the mark. International development, so because the high-paying jobs basically are member of parliament. international NGO work. So if you go to the primest malls in Nairobi, the best apartments, the best, that's who are your neighbors, who lives with who. Now, one of the conversations I keep having with my friends in development stroke human rights professionals in Nairobi who are Kenyan, is this peculiar thing that you hear of these organizations who are transparent, but you never know who their constituencies are. You never know what anybody earns. Our politicians are then terribly corrupt, evil people, which they quite often are. But you know, we are debating all the time what they earn, who they serve, and what they do. But now, development and development narratives is everywhere. Like school kids give you those narratives. I even wonder sometimes if I gave a community cameras, for example, to take pictures of themselves, whether they're self-editing to present their compassionate, piteous face, because the narrative of self-presentation has become so pervasive that you don't know where and how these things start anymore. The final thing is I kind of wanted to put in an anecdotal way. So I come to London. I'm doing a master's degree in creative writing in Norwich, and I'm visiting a friend's mom, or a friend's place, who moved to England. It's sort of the crash of the economy. She had been a matron for a long time, Mrs. Charity Kimani. She moved with her two younger kids at around the time Kenya shilling crashed. Again, IMF conditionalities. Your salary couldn't make ends meet. You had a good public service job. It used to work. It didn't work anymore. So she moved to the UK and said, I've finished educating my kids. So she was living in South London, in Kennington. So I used to visit a long time from Norwich, which is kind of boring, and stay with them. And she's like a mom to me. So she had worked 10, 12 years here, made a good living for herself as a high-quality nurse, doing all kinds of stuff, was ready to go home, finished educating her kids. And so she had been applying for development jobs. She had huge experience working as a matron in Kenya and the nursing thing here. So she was like, if I'm going to live at home, I must be able to transition in such a way that I can give some kind of service. But part of the difficulties in the bureaucracy of this thing, however the bureaucracies looked like, was that she couldn't be a local because she's Kenyan, but she's now British. But to get a job, local, of course, there are local rates. Then expatriate comes with a whole other set of packages because all the things that make you safe, happy, free in Britain, the person going from here has to make sure that they're secure that way because, you could get Ebola or something. I don't know. So all those things have to be secured. So where does she sit? So she could get a posting in Zambia or Honduras. But the Kenya thing was kind of complicated. So she gave it up, moved back home and started a business and does that thing on her own regard. Which is to say, in that full circle, where now the borders are blurred between where is where. I don't know whether it's about the Kenyan government fixing farming. It's a little bit about that. But we're kind of in a weird globalized age where everybody is tumbling from here to there. And sovereignties themselves are complex. But I do know that there is no fate inside this conversation without Africans here first politically organizing themselves to be in the middle, the dead middle of the British conversation about its relationship with their own continent and development, in the dead political center of it. There is no other way, actually. And I'm not saying there is resistance or not resistance, but whatever shifts in that conversation, the imagery of development is the same, David Living, it's the same one. It just has new buzzwords, it's sustainability, community, data. Each three words are the same ones, but it's still a very significant application of power. And well-meaning is a useful term, and of course we always want well-meaning and enter the tube. We want everybody drowning in a well to be saved. But this country doesn't exist without it. The services that people have come to expect, like NHS, did not happen because of well-meaning. They happened because of political struggles to get to that point. And so it's how those political struggles will be taken upon by a British generation with deep roots in different places as well, and them being in the center of those deep roots. So that politicization is absolutely necessary. Because if one is talking about a partnership, that's what a partnership, that's what I know it looks like. I keep having this conversation about websites, embassy websites. The China ones, they usually go and say, there's a big mall we are building there where you can buy China goods. The British one usually has a photo of the ambassador in a school with barefoot children, giving them water, food, computer, something piteously compassionate on the front page. And then the minister saying, Britain's partnership, and nowadays there are no imperial colors, no large sort of like, royal, no. It's all sherry. It's all very, it usually kindergarten happy colors on the website. But if you are like a business person trying to find out, how do I go do business and buy goods and services in Britain? That shit is not on their website. If you want to know how many companies are trading in Britain, it shit is not on their website. But I'm like, don't you want to do business? Or do you want to hide the business requests inside the humanitarian PR companies you're funding? Because when you put that out in the front, it frees up the other space. And it's not that it's evil. Business, you want to change whatever, but why hide? Like, what's the plain sight? Because to me now, if 8 years ago, you were able to have even that conversation about the intervention, as they're talking about Greece now, as those countries tumbled post-IMF conditionalities, and they did. They lost entire middle class, and those entire middle classes moved here, and elsewhere, not all of them, but enough, right? It's not about now question of blame game, so it has happened. So now where do we go to? And what kind of conversations do we have about where we are? Because right now, even the holes being poked in the illusion of getting along are not visible. Like, no one's listening. No one's thinking this is a good thing. No one's thinking this is happy. Well, there was a time, just sort of around 2003, 2004, I was in a bar in Nairobi, kind of very bougie bar, and sitting next to this guy, and I'm like, so what do you do? He's like, I work for an NGO. This is very common now. So I'm like, you're Kenyan, so which one is it? It's an orphanage. So I'm like, oh, okay. How's the job? Fine. So now you never know whether, because I don't know how to put it, but there's a certain sort of NGO type face, which when you start to engage it, it's like you're beating a puppy, so you don't want to like ask an ironical question, because he's like, I work with harmed children. And then you're like, now, I really have, so I didn't want, so we start chatting, and he's like, so anyway, the thing is, I'm earning this kind of money. The thing is, it's a good gig when you have it, because I thought of doing politics and so on and so forth, but that doesn't happen. At least this is where there are jobs. Okay, so we get it. So so somewhere in the middle of this, as we get drunker and drunker, he starts telling me about this particular image problem that the orphanage is having. The problem had become that basically, so you have all these people who are happy, well-meaning British or French. I don't know actually which nation they came from or whether they were international, who basically buy or rent an orphan. So the orphans come to the orphanage, and there's Paul, and then Paul is built a narrative. And then so someone who's like, oh, I work, so Paul is mine, and so I'll be sending my £4 a month, which maintains Paul, gets him a decent education, he plays basketball, and then goes to university, then this. So all this was working, and it was a very kind of efficient system, but people are kind of a bit skewed in their mentality. So what had happened is that long before, because as their structures grew, the thing had to start to be, because of course, if Paul is coming, or Peter, or Jane, or whoever they are, may not necessarily give that happy, safe narrative when their conversation is authentically put. Or when they're having a real conversation across with their donor, it could get weird because he's not saying the right things, or she's not saying, what if this person pulls out and stops their, what do you call it, monthly subscription thing? So they started editing the narrative and rewriting them, and his job was rewriting these interactive narratives so that this person is not actually talking to Paul, but talking to another narrative. So, but the thing fell apart. It had just fallen apart because this woman on a spa decided to just book a ticket and go and see Paul. So she turns up at the office. But there is no Paul by that point because, of course, these kinds of things are not efficient. Paul might have been, his mother came and took him away. But they've already got this gig where there's this regular thing coming for Paul. And maybe, you know, with integrity, they're sharing that money among them all and they can show you accounts. But, of course, you have the moral corruption of pure pity because ultimately no one's invested in a real kind of political conversation, and you want to keep it in this sort of very safe narratives which still refuse to see. How many minutes do I have left? 2 minutes. So then I got called, so somewhere along the line became this fashionable, I didn't intend, just a rant on an email that went at Granta. It's free online, my essay. It's just there, if you Google it. So this guy comes, he gives me a call, I'm in Nairobi, and he's like, I am the head of the EU humanitarian thing. He's a Dutchman, he's very, very cool, he's got a floppy haircut, and I like him immediately. We go and drink again in another bougie bar, and he's like, I've been wanting to talk to you. He's like, I don't like how this development is done. There are all these Mzungus, all these white people, and everything else. We have to work with Africans, we have to do something different. And he was planning to bring Bono to Mogadishu for a concert. That's one of the things he was planning to do. So he says, we have to save sleeping sickness. Sleeping sickness is a forgotten disease. So we are doing this project on sleeping sickness, and we want you to go to Sudan, South Sudan, and we wanted to get the best writer out of Africa, and for writers to write so that we raise awareness for people because there's no funding going into research for sleeping sickness. So I'm like, cool. And of course now, how do I get to Sudan? You can't go to, let's just start. At that time, you don't go to Sudan unless you're already partnered with donor NGO types because they're the ones who kind of like created like pipelines of safety to carry you inside. That's why journalists only talk from that perspective because that's the only way they get to go to these places often now, these days, right? So, but I mean, I don't really have an issue with it because at this time I hadn't kind of started to grapple with this idea of power quite in a comprehensive way or more comprehensive way. So I'm fine. So I like, okay, so how much? He's like, $7,000. I had never seen such money in my life. Never. I mean, I was already a pretty well-known, I'd never ever seen, I'll pay you $7,000, you'll be working with this very cool Dutch photographer called so-and-so, and you go take photos, you'll attend a meeting of many, many medical NGOs, MSF, Spain, France, in Uganda, where they shall integrate you into all the health systems of sleeping sickness going on in all of South Sudan, which are many. We went, learned things. I met this SPLA doctor who was kind of having very many post-traumatic stress disorders, but he was part of the group. And he was getting drunk all the time. And it was just an interesting, peculiar educational thing, but very sincere. So we moved off to Yei, where there was a German-built hospital. Now, just to give you a short summary, so this partnership was basically an NGO called Malteser, which is a Catholic church NGO, who were convinced by this guy who's a general donor with a lot of money and power in the EU system, and he said, I want this to happen. Malteser, are you game? Malteser, an interesting guy called Adolf, who looked terrifying when we first met him, was like, I don't know if this is good for us, but he fell into place, bought in, and then he got the money now to service this whole project. But he was an interesting guy because when we chatted, he'd said, one of the things he was known for is he built this petrol station in a small village in Uganda, which ended up being a way that served this kind of community hospital thing that they were doing in Uganda. So anyway, what happens? We finish the book, we come back, I go write the book about South Sudan, about this guy, about sleeping sickness. I think I kind of did okay. I'm not a bad guy at writing. And so, but I was kind of happy and proud of it. So the thing goes silent. So one day, the photographer who was working with, who's Dutch, calls me up. I'm in my house and he's like, you need to get in a cab right now and rush. We're having this secret meeting, which you're not in. So I dash, and I come in there, and there's the Dutch guy with his boss who's just flown from Spain, who has been like, you can't do this. According to EU policy, there's no Sudan, so you can't say South Sudan. That South Sudan has to be taken off all those texts, and this has to be taken off those texts, and this has to be taken off those texts. So at this point, I walked in. They were discussing whether to have a safe photo exhibition with Sven's photographs and safe quotes below my text. Me, I didn't offer revolution in my text. I didn't say we need to like go and start World War II. Me, I just thought I said what I saw, and I thought that it served their purpose. So basically, they bailed. So they were like, okay, we've contracted to pay you this money, but we can't produce this book. So like, okay, I own the text. So I went, rushed around, hustled, and we published the text with the photos independently. But the guy turned up for the launch. And found himself making a speech. So that's why, yeah, that's my 10 cents about the the politics of starving babies. Thank you.
Binyavanga, that is very, very hard to follow, that skewering of the developing world. I mean, I can hear from the laughter you hit a few nerves, maybe bust a few preconceptions that people might have had out there about the world of development. But just one sentence that I think I want to pick up and reflect a little bit back through the panel as we go into the short presentations that the panel's going to make. You said the imagery of development is the application of power. I thought that was a really telling phrase, and I'm sure that's something that the panel will want to reflect on as they give their thoughts. Before we get into that, I just wanted to very quickly give you a bit more detail about who we have sitting at this table. We have sitting at the end Marianne Jam, as Nick said, a businesswoman. She's also a blogger and has recently been named as one of the most influential Africans of 2015. She's made it into one of those lists like you have, Binyavanga. And I was interested to read some of Marianne's stuff on the web, actually. And in a recent open letter to Bono and Bob Geldof, you said, respectfully, that the African diaspora has matured and African people have changed. Africa needs partners, not masters. So maybe that's something you can tell us a little bit about in your thoughts later. Jack Lundy sitting here, Director of Communications at Oxfam, before that at Save the Children, where we worked together, and before that at Blue Peter as an assistant editor, so interesting career trajectory. Under Jack's watch, you might have seen actually a recent huge campaign that Oxfam's done around the World Economic Forum on inequality, which made a lot of headlines about the inequalities around the world and growing gaps between the rich and the poor. And also at Save the Children, Jack launched a film about Syria, which went into 45 million homes around the world, telling the story of what it would be like to be in Syria if you were in Britain. So flipping that idea of, you know, always looking at the victims of this. And it's Juliana Rufus, an Al Jazeera journalist, award-winning Al Jazeera journalist, a documentary maker whose work has taken her to places, some of the most dangerous places I think we probably see on Earth, Somalia, Libya, Democratic Republic of Congo. But I think, Juliana, what I was struck by when looking at a little of your work earlier and reading some of your motivations behind your work, you said you don't do news, that's not for you, that 2.5-minute caricature of the world. You do documentaries because you want to get below the surface of things. And I think that's something that we're trying to get to in this. How do we properly reflect the way that people see their own circumstances, something that Binyavanga has really talked about very powerfully there. So if I could just ask you to have a few thoughts and some responses to what Binyavanga has talked about.
Yeah, sure. Coincidentally, I picked up on the same thing that you were saying in a slightly different way, that they're shifting imagery of development, but the status quo remains the same. And I'm actually wondering if we as journalists can create different images if we change the way practically in which we're working. But before I start with that, maybe I do feel very privileged that I'm working for Al Jazeera, and I joined Al Jazeera very consciously because it's the broadcaster that comes out of what is described as the global south. So it's different in that it is run out of Qatar, and joining Al Jazeera, I was attracted to the idea of working for people who weren't from the West and who set out to think outside the Western, if there is such a thing, mainstream news that was going on. I knew that would challenge me and that would challenge the way I have to tell stories. Al Jazeera very early on had a slogan saying, we're looking at the other story. Stories were chosen by importance. Al Jazeera never set out to chase ratings, to chase audiences. So what was very clear from the start, Al Jazeera was never going to send in a young celebrity into Congo, discovering, lo and behold, that there's a conflict going on and that was terribly awful, and then broadcasting that to a domestic audience somewhere. It was much more about understanding what the conflict is, why it is taking place, and allowing people to speak. Also, as a filmmaker, it is very challenging working for Al Jazeera in that, for me, I'm not broadcasting to a British audience or a German audience. When I go to, let's say, Nigeria, the primary audience that I think about is the Nigerian audience. The challenge to me is that I, as a Western journalist who parachutes in, have to tell that audience something that is revelatory to them. And I also have to make a film that portrays them in a way that they will find valid and constructive, and I will get Twitter feedback and any other feedback very quickly if I don't do that. And I think that is a very, very good way of keeping journalists and journalism in check. So I have a lot going against me. I'm a Western journalist who parachutes in. I'm based in London. I work around the world. I also cover conflicts. I work in investigations, so I cover a lot of dark stuff where the risk is immediately apparent that people get portrayed as victims, which is a big challenge for me. What I've got going for me is that I'm in programming and not in news. So the shortest piece that I will do is 25 minutes, so I have more time to explore and more time that I can give people. I think filmmaking is inherently different from photography, which we've already heard about, in that a photography captures a moment in time. As a filmmaker, I'm dealing with a dynamic. In fact, I think I'm dealing with two dynamics. I'm dealing with a dynamic that unfolds on screen between the people that get filmed, but I'm also dealing with the dynamic between me and the people that get filmed, and they're both very important. So what I hope and what I think is important, and this goes back to what you were saying, I really believe that how global issues and issues of development are portrayed and understood can be changed through the way in which we're working as journalists. And for me, there are three main points. Firstly, it is what is the story that we tell about a country and how do we choose the story? So you were saying earlier on that in October last year, I was working in Somalia, and everybody thought I should do a story in Somalia. People were very excited that I had good access to the Somali government. And first, when I started looking into it, I hit all the reports that were coming out of Nairobi. At the time, the UN Sanctions Committee had published a report about corruption, and it seemed to be a no-brainer that the story about Somalia had to be about corruption. And then I started speaking to Somali friends and the Somali community, and they were all saying, no, 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 the biggest thing that's going on in Somalia is that we're starting to build a nation state. And I sat there and thought, oh my God, how do I make a film about building a nation state? That's the most abstract and difficult thing to do, but I had one thing going for me. I guess I had access to the president and his entourage. So what we set out to do was consciously is the story that I think, and I was told, mattered most to the Somali community. It was about how do you take a country out of 20 years of civil war, and how do you actually build a country? What does it take? And we filmed the president traveling around negotiating with warlords. So that to me, firstly, is how do you, change images? It is about what story do you choose? Secondly, as a Western journalist, I very much ask myself, am I the right person to tell the story? And especially at Al Jazeera, where I have so many capable colleagues, but also given that I think that there are some really amazing journalists now emerging around the world. And sometimes the answer to myself is no, I'm not the right journalist to tell this story, and local journalists are better equipped. However, when I work in investigations, I think there are also strong reasons for me sometimes to go in. For example, in Sri Lanka, after the war came to an end, and there were strong allegations of war crimes having taken place, and Sri Lankan journalists told me that this was not a story that they could tell because they wouldn't have, they would have been put into prison. So I think that is a strong precedent, or a strong enough cause for me to go in and then try and tell that story. We counterbalance that at Al Jazeera by also having strands like Africa Investigate, where there are African journalists who get teamed up with filmmakers who who as Africans conduct investigations in Africa and choose stories. So I would say on the channel there is a variety. And we also have Viewfinder, where journalists from around the world, documentary journalists, get trained to make films in Latin America, in Africa, and in Asia, to tell films from their perspective. And what's interesting about that is how often they want to tell positive stories, and stories of people overcoming adversity. But going back to how are the best ways and how can we change things through storytelling, I think there is a very important, for me the key thing is that we can actually, as storytellers, make it participatory. And that struck me most when I filmed in Nigeria a story about trafficking. Trafficking of Nigerian women into the sex trade in Italy. And for me, that was possibly the most gruesome story that I ever had to deal with. What these women went through, and as somebody who's covered conflict and all sorts of things, there were stories not like anything that I'd never heard before. And we managed to find in Nigeria a woman called Gloria, who had worked as a sex worker in Nigeria and was deported back. And when we interviewed her, she wasn't really able, she was so traumatized she couldn't tell her story. And the interview was going nowhere. So we turned it around and said, how about you actually tell us why you wanted to leave and you become our guide. And suddenly she was energized and she took the lead. We went to her village, she told us why she wanted to leave the village, why she had gone to Italy, and everything came together. And I think it is, I don't know if I can call it collaborative, but it is that way of filmmaking where really the person who tells the story is being put in charge and sets the agenda, and we translate that on screen, that different images start to emerge. And I know my time is up. I just want to say one more thing, because there is quite often this gets coached into or put into the words, we're giving people dignity. And I don't particularly like the idea of we are giving dignity, because it sounds like being a benevolent dictator, and here you are, you get some dignity from us, the filmmakers. I really think it is about giving people agency, and agency is the most powerful representation that you can give to somebody, and I think agency can lead to change.
Julia,
Diana talked there a little bit about giving people agency, getting people to participate in the filmmaking, listening to what people want to film. How much are you able to do that kind of thing in your role as an NGO, puppy-faced NGO leader?
Yes, well, in my most piteously compassionate voice. Let me respond to that. Well, yes, we do participatory projects, and we did one with a television celebrity photographer in Makuru, in Nairobi. We do that, but I want first, in order to get through my slides, I was going to request that you might donate that clicker to me, just for 5 minutes. I'll give you a couple of grand afterwards for that. Okay, so to begin, Oxfam, we're one of those INGO things that you've heard so eloquently described. We exist to fight poverty. I think you probably know that, and we believe in the power of people to defeat and overcome the poverty in their lives, and we spend our time trying to create a world in which poverty no longer exists. So poverty is our narrative. That's the starting point. We do shape public perceptions in our communications, there's no doubt about that, but our communications are always commissioned and intended to engage an audience with the type of engagement that will help drive our cause. And that could be fundraising, it could be campaigning on an issue like inequality, it could just be raising levels of awareness, for instance, around climate change and its disproportionate impact on poorer people. The intended audience and the nature of that engagement that we want to drive dictates the story that we tell, of course. But we are aware of the fact that no audience is discrete, particularly in the changing and expanding media landscape, that you can't just target one audience. You might tweet to one person, but Twitter followers will know that can end up everywhere. So we're aware of that, and we're also aware of the fact that communication achieves more than its primary intended impact. So although you may intend to raise money by telling a story, the narrative that you use may also change people's perceptions. So we are aware of that and our responsibility. I'm going to show you some pictures. I thought I would. Sometimes we tell our supporters stories of women farmers who, with our help and the help of our supporters, more pointedly, have access to the finance they need to start a rice farm, as is the case for Chitra here in India. We need our audience to see the difference that they've made with their money. It's a positive story of progress, and we need them to believe that we can end poverty. So that's all good. I think that's probably not that contentious, and we do tell the story of progress, particularly in years like this, when the world will agree what our next set of development goals will be. And in this country, where we are trying to enshrine our commitment to spend 0.7% of our gross income on development, we have to defend aid and demonstrate that it works. And it does, I'm happy to reassure you. But the rest of the photos I'm going to show are at the pointier end of what I thought would be the discourse of this gathering, what is this? Meeting, this evening. So I'm going to show some more contentious imagery. So, sometimes we tell our Facebook followers stories of the impossible choices that poverty forces parents to make. So imagine a mother being so malnourished that she could only feed one of her twins. Yeah, that's shocking, isn't it? Zamir and Zamira here, their mother had to make a choice. Now, the power of this photograph is one that we won't use because there's a risk, and what I was saying about the secondary impact of images like this is that it might invoke in our audience in the UK cultural prejudice. Because in our culture, this could be contentious, but we don't value boys, the child that she fed is the boy, that much more highly than girls. I had to be careful with that because, of course, sexism exists in our culture. I'm aware of that, but not to that degree. And we wouldn't use that photograph because it might engender cultural prejudice that would prevent and disengage an audience from doing what we want them to do, which is actually give us money to fund our humanitarian responses to help tackle malnutrition. So I'm putting that up there. hoping that that might inspire questions from you. Sometimes in emergency, we have more license to show harder-hitting imagery, particularly if that kind of imagery is already in the news space on channels like Al Jazeera or other broadcasters. It feels less gratuitous. There are times, and certainly I worked with Ishbel at Save the Children, where this kind of imagery is used more frequently. Oxfam use it very sparingly because gratuitous shots of children suffering from acute malnutrition are challenging, and they do reinforce a dynamic that you have to be careful to couch. Of course, as I said, we only communicate with an intention to drive our cause, but we are aware of the other implications. Does it reinforce that? Well, you decide. Was it factual? Most certainly. This is taken in northern Kenya during the famine, the man-made famine, I hasten to add, and it's intended to engender, of 2011, and it was intended to engender outrage. It may well do, in your mind. Does it in the long term make it harder for us to end poverty permanently, to deliver our narrative using imagery like this? Hard to prove, possible. We want the world to tackle the absurd economic inequality that exists now in a world where the 80 richest people on the planet have as much wealth, as much combined wealth as half of the population of the planet, 3.5 billion people. So a photograph like this of, oh, by the way, we want to tackle that not because we hate tax dodgers, but because it talks to our cause. We can't end poverty unless we address the gap between the rich and the rest. So South Sudanese boy here in a refugee camp wearing a boating blazer that may well once have adorned someone living at the other end of the spectrum of wealth is a fitting image for our communications. What does it tell you about South Sudan? An image of our chief executive visiting another refugee camp in South Sudan is also an image we probably wouldn't show. It's a white, middle-aged man picking up an African child. It's not the dynamic that we really want to deliver. But he made a trip, he went there, he runs our organisation. So we would want to observe that, but we might step away from that because it reinforces dynamics. The power of the image is secondary, you know, it's layered, isn't it? And I'm putting these up to drive response, obviously. So instead, when things get really bad...
Oh, dear me.
I'm not going to finish that. So we did that. Yeah, we did it. And we can laugh about it. But a celebrity in the story brings an audience. South Sudan, tragically, because most people in the UK don't watch Al Jazeera, they watch the BBC and the ITV. South Sudan and what's unfolding there is not news, but Keira Knightley is news. So if we want to engage the public in raising funds to try and make sure that kids don't die of cholera in the refugee camps in South Sudan, there's a trade-off to be done, isn't there? But what does it really reinforce in terms of our perception? I'll leave that with you. By the way, Red Nose Day is on Friday, March the 13th. And now for something completely different. I couldn't not do Blue Peter. Engaging the kids in the UK with a Blue Peter appeal to help children in Malawi who'd lost their parents to HIV/AIDS and were bringing up their own siblings. Amazing program, really worthwhile supporting. It does mean telling the story of need. But as Juliana said, when you talk in film, you have more time to tell a fuller story. So Blue Peter told the story of what it means to be a kid growing up in Malawi, and they play games just like that. So you can build a more meaningful empathy between your audience and the contributors that feature in your content. Very different in a photograph. But for a young audience to understand and feel that they have a place in the world and that they can change the world here in the UK is a good thing, I would argue. And I'm going to leave it on that.
Just before we move on, I wondered if you would like to pick up Binyavanga's point, which seems to be that this kind of imagery doesn't reflect the reality of life in Africa. It reflects a tiny, tiny bit and distorts what, you know, the British public sees about Africa.
Yeah, I mean, I struggle a bit with what the truth of Africa is. 54 nations, Africa is home to, 17 of the world's poorest countries. It's also home to the 10 fastest growing economies. Africa's a big place, and there's a lot of different stuff going on there. We exist to fight poverty. That's the story that we're going to tell, because that's what we want. We want to lead the ending of extreme poverty by 2030. That's the Sustainable Development Goal that we will support. We do tell the story of progress, but I don't believe, for one thing, I don't believe there's one story of Africa. Africa's a very, very big place. If it's factual and the intention is not to deceive, but to engage with the reality that's confronted by nearly 1 billion people every day, I think I can defend that. There are other stories coming out of Africa. It might be the job of channels like Al Jazeera to tell those stories. And as I say, we do tell that story when it serves our purpose. We are bound and regulated by a commission that requires us to spend money against our charitable purpose, which is the ending of poverty. Now, if engendering the belief that poverty can be ended, which the dramatic progress over the last 20 years testifies to, then we'll tell that story, and we do at the right moment. And to those supporters who already support us and do believe that, we'll do that. But that's appropriate to tell that story, I would argue.
I'm sure people are going to pick that up when we throw this out to questions. Mariam, Binyavanga said Africans should be in the middle of the conversation. How do you get to the middle of the conversation?
Oh dear. Shit. Not even sure where to start. We have two things I want to get. You have an option to just stand up a little bit to push yourself, or close your eyes for 1 second, please. Which one do you want to do? Stand up? Come on then, up. Because what we're going to say is going to be like, oh. Right. I think we can start now. Thank you so much for standing up. Thank you. Right. First of all, I'm just very honored to be on the same panel with my hero here. Thank you so much, brother. Thank you. You're one of my heroes. Lovely to meet you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Right. 15 years ago, I wouldn't sit with ODI on the same table. I wouldn't work with them. I wouldn't work with any NGOs in the UK. I was very disruptive as an individual. But I'm getting better. I'm getting older now. So in that time, we used to talk about Mugabe, and I used to hear Mugabe all the time. So Mugabe is my hero, you like it or not. He's my hero. And I'll tell you why he's my hero, okay? So you can see him. He's cool. He's got a good diet. He's 94. He doesn't get older. I just want to be like Mugabe. You know what I mean? I just want to be old like Mugabe ever. Never come out of, just celebrate my birthday every single year. This is what I want to do. So I'm a daughter of Africa, as you can see. I'm just going to be quick. I got only 5 minutes. So this is my twin brother. I was born in Senegal, and my mom gave us in an orphanage. She comes from a big family, very wealthy family in Senegal. If you know West Africa, you know how the system works. Extremely wealthy in Senegal, but she couldn't keep us. She gave us to an orphanage. That's the picture at me and my brother, who is now in Germany. And she gave us, we really had a very, very difficult childhood. And then at 15 years old, she sold me as a prostitute in Paris. I'll tell you why in a minute. So those are my amazing ladies I help in Africa. I believe that my lack of education, I didn't go to school until I was 16 years old. I slept in a tube station in Paris for 1 year and a half. I got picked up by the social services. So I'm a social case in Paris. I was social case until 16 years. So I started getting my education when I was 16. So those girls I'm helping. But I just want to pause there a little bit to tell you why I am here and why I'm interested in this debate and why I'm very honored to be part of this conversation. when I used to talk about Africa 15 years ago, people used to laugh. I used to fight with the BBC, fight with the Guardian, big organization to stop talking bad about Africa. But in that time, they didn't have the right content to say good about Africa. They didn't have, we need to be fair with some of the NGOs. They didn't have the content. They didn't, even if they had the content, they didn't know how to manage the content. It was only few outlets talking about Africa at that time. And now, 15 years later, now we have the right content. We can now talk about Africa in a very positive way. So I used to write about narratives about Africa, really telling people, stop talking about Africa in a very negative way. Save the children, I don't even talk to them, they're not my friends, but now we're friends. There are some organizations I really don't talk to. I know. And don't even start me on Bono, please. Don't even start me on it, because we're not gonna leave tonight. Honestly, don't start me on Bob Geldof, don't start me on any of those stuff. But, we're not going to, and honestly, we're not going to finish the conversation. But I think what is nice now is that Africa, I've seen the progress in 15 years. And I've seen also the NGOs, Oxfam. We used to get clothes in my village when I grew up. We used to get Oxfam clothes. And when I see Oxfam had hired an African woman from Uganda to head the organization, it makes me very, very proud. It's fantastic they're doing that. And what I like about ODI is also they're trying very, very hard to show the good and to balance, information, the things we consume here in the West. But what's happening right now in Africa is that we have internet connection. We have people changing. Their lives are being changed. You're not going to have people like me, now suffering. We have a lot of poverty in Africa. Of course, we have kids walking around in villages in Africa. But I think now you have Africans, you have voices in the continent who are saying, no, we don't want this anymore. And you have amazing journalists who are saying, we would like to be part of this conversation, but we would like to become responsible. It's not a mafia of narrative anymore. What I always said is that we have this mafia of narrators about Africa. People who just, it's a mafia. It's not a mafia. They really write things about Africa, and they put it in, they put the content on the Guardian, and it goes to the BBC, and it goes everywhere. And then you tweet it goes everywhere. And then you get Mariam Jam saying, no, you can't say that. But the reason why we couldn't say that is because we need to educate people. We need to collaborate more. We need to be more kind, I think, in what we're talking about Africa. So, we have amazing stuff going on in Africa. I go to Africa 3 times a month. I see amazing people, really amazing people. Maybe thanks to the education they get from the West. I don't know. But I know that our people are now awake and they're doing amazing stuff. So be part of that conversation. We have amazing tech hubs across Africa. I'm part of this ecosystem. I'm a technologist, so I've learned to, through my education, I've learned to code and to program. So now I teach young girls across Africa how to code, from Java to PHP. Amazing girls from Burkina Faso to Senegal, in Kinshasa, Madagascar. Everywhere you go, young girls are doing amazing work. So we have 104 tech hubs. This is not an updated map. 104 technology hubs across Africa. They are tech spaces. They will have 59 women tech networks, amazing women developing mobile applications. 15 years ago, you wouldn't hear that story. The Africa people talk about is very, very negative. But the reason why they talk about it is because they don't know better. They don't know which narrative we should talk about. And then, again, like, my friend from Algeria said, who are you, who is consuming your information? Who is your audience? That's why I like Al Jazeera. I like them. I like the fact, this is the only news, only website I read them, because I know that they take care of the information. And that's responsibility. That's being responsible as a journalist. And we don't want to hear this anymore, because this is not the reality. We have poverty in the UK too. I go to prisons in the UK. I spend every Thursday afternoon, if I'm not busy in my office, I spend time in prisons helping young girls who are in jail to code. So I know we have poverty in the UK. I know our government are letting young girls in this country down too. So I can make the comparison between Binta in Senegal and a young girl here in the UK. So we just need to be responsible on how we're talking about this kind of stuff. And one of the things that made me upset a couple of weeks ago is Ebola and the DFID, what DFID do. And Ebola is there is no Ebola hero. This guy, there is no Ebola hero. There is no Ebola hero. Why are we talking about this guy as an Ebola? So for weeks they've been tweeting this on the website. This is not responsible. It's not responsible. And this is the kind of thing we're talking about. It's not responsible. The Africa we want is this Africa I see on the ground. It's not perfect. 15 years ago, we couldn't talk about this. But now, you go everywhere you go, from Nairobi to Senegal. You'll see amazing people making a difference. In the diaspora, everywhere. So we need to start looking, also changing, the editors of these newspapers need to start changing the narratives themselves as well. Need to be, we can't be fearful about Africa anymore. We have tech hubs. Like I said, we just opened one we have in Senegal, in Kinshasa, and we're going to try to open more across Africa. We're investing. Invest in Africa. This is the right time to invest in Africa. It's the time to go and invest. You can invest in startups. You can invest in many things across Africa. I'm honored enough to sit on a select committee of Tony Elumelu, Nigerian billionaire. He just put $100 million on African startup. In 10 years, we're going to have the best African entrepreneurs we've ever seen. Come back and come and work with us on the ground. Let's change narratives about Africa, because the reality is that right now things are changing. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
We're just going to have a few minutes of discussion. Nick, if you want to come back up and join the panel. And I think we're going to throw it open straight to some questions. But while Nick is joining the panel, I want to quickly come back to you, Binyavanga. Different perspectives there, really very different perspectives. When you hear and see Jack's picture of that child in northern Kenya, do you feel this is my Kenya? I feel ownership of this aspect of Africa?
But it could be Honduras. at some point, like of course, maybe since 1980, data management systems, Twitter response, whatever, retweet things will start to tell you who and where and how people respond. Maybe people knew that in 1980, whether if it's a Northern Kenyan one. I know once was told that it's very difficult to make imagery of Africans in tattered Western clothes. So like, for example, a lot of money used to flood into Pokot because the kind of cool poverty which has a spear and sort of, beaded things. Also, so I'm sure these things drive whatever it is. That's not, I'm happy this makes you all happy, or in the terms of being useful for something. But, David Livingstone coming here or somewhere like this to say, because where Africans speak, every person who's an African intellectual of any kind will tell you one of our core foundational stories is that the Bible came with a gun following. Simple. I'm sure David didn't have imperial ambitions. He was just like, volunteer, come save them. They're dying of those things people die for in the dark continent, and so on and so forth. And then, some come in and some say, it's good farmland. And was like, what if we have a railway? It's flat, it's vanishing. What's the interesting thing is that in between of those narratives, those letters, those communications first have defined the language. So that language is already inside the British body public. So then now all you need to do is present photos that speak to that emotional range, that starts to manipulate the existing. She's not wrong when you say the status quo still exists. It's still about an application of power. Now, it's not Britain's job to make African powerful. That's ours, right? But the things about it is, my present question about moral corruption is, if you ask yourself since 1992, 93, what's the amount of petty cash in that economy compared to before the post-IMF question? Like, how much bigger? I didn't know, for example, that people like the head of Oxfam, Nairobi, can call the president and say no. For example, in Kenya, if you put on a news, if there's a drought in Cumberland, the first thing you see, you would never see this in 1990. It's not that it was better in 1990, I'm just saying you couldn't see it. And this plays out all over, is the area governor saying, I'm appealing to donors to please come and feed these people. That there was at least enough of an independence of system that was the government's job. And in this sort of kind of privatization thing where now everyone has to mass rush for a celebrity or a little bit of pity money, and then also push the thing harder, faster, more compassionate, more whatever, apparently the solution to poverty reduction is design. And we are sitting now, 10 years after, we've gone through this kind of nice neoliberal phase, and I'm a happy one sometimes likes my cappuccino, where you guys are being forced out of your apartments because of money, right? And it's gone to this point at which kids are living here, appearing in Syria. Something is shifting completely, and that's going to have significant political repercussion. That Africa Rising thing is also going to bring Africa chaos too, right? All that creativity, people don't want to be contained and constrained in ideas anymore. So I don't know, and for me, so I feel like there's been that safe, I'm building a well in Africa or India or whatever, from 1885 to now, kind of thing. I'm now interested, personally, in the narrative that starts to say, I want to see people who are British, who come from that world, and who are invested in that world, in the center of this politics of how you engage with that world, because it's now become critical for Britain, so little girls don't end up on CCTV cameras going off to Turkey. So that you have all these sorts of mediums of power, right, that somehow are the ones that define how this narrative is going to do to that. It's far more than a question of saving that life.
Nick, I just quickly want to bring you back in because Binyavanga's bringing out the point that there's a story in Africa, shouldn't we also reflect the stories here? You've actually done work here.
I mean, I've actually been commissioned by Oxfam to do poverty in Glasgow, so I think it's very important. One of the reasons I also wanted to show pictures of Latin America is that we are, we're using a broad paintbrush to kind of, it's a whole continent. And I think, my standpoint, similar to Oxfam, is to eliminate extreme poverty. You can find rich people in Glasgow the way you can find rich people in Nairobi. Ultimately, I think a lot of our work is also campaigning for governments to change. It's not just the pity cash. I think that, strong images directed to the right people. Often NGOs come to me and say, this is what we want to do, and they have all sorts of ideas about getting BBC and Al Jazeera on, and actually you think, well, actually 5 minutes with Obama or the Prime Minister of such and such a country is going to make the changes. So I think it's very difficult to do these broad brush strokes because there are different horses, as we would say, for different courses. Poverty exists everywhere. I think most of us here tonight, our campaign is to eliminate extreme poverty. And I think...
I want to push back a bit again. So Libya fell. I did like Gaddafi. I think he was crazy. He was funding the AU and so on and so forth. He was kind of in his own weird way a Pan-Africanist. But Libya just went like that because African countries stood together and said, don't do this. Fuckers went and bombed NATO, right? Finished the job. Those guns end up in Mali tumbles, northern Nigeria, Boko Haram, all that thing. So now what happens? Then, on the other side of the news, you're like, Oxfam, whatever says, the condition of children in the villages of da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Do you understand me that sitting from our side point as well, these affiliations themselves, there's just who's coming to sweep up? Where, not Britain's forces, but where these kinds of evils happen. Where does the messaging start to say, we lobby and commission? And that's why I keep saying that now that you have people with direct family, consequence, whatever, who are British, who are well-educated, who are influenceable, that they're not present enough inside the political system that says, okay, I'm in Oxfam, and I'm saying, no, you can't do that because I have this constituency that has refused. That's not my politics say, but just from my eyes, it seems obvious that until that point is reached, right, this conversation is not really that real, but does not even have the legitimization, the genuine legitimization of everything else. So people treat it cynically. They're like, oh, okay, if you pay for it, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the main thing really that's changed, and I think that is represented in politics and in media, is that the West's hold about world events, whether they're political or whether they're questions of representation, has gone away. And at the very least, it's now a two-way street where either Africa is hitting back, or where, you know, I think it's interesting what you're saying in terms of, you know, looking at what's happening here in British girls disappearing into Syria. This is partly a media story, because they are disappearing because ISIS in Syria is broadcasting itself. They have developed, or they are using social media to tell their own story. I mean, value judgments aside, whether it's good or bad, but they're creating their own image. And for complicated political reasons, that is attractive to youth living in Britain. So yeah, I think, I mean, the questions there of politics and media are completely inseparable and are getting very layered.
Okay, quick comment, and then I want to take some questions from the audience.
I think we need to move away from poverty. We can't end poverty without justice. We have a big problem of justice in Africa. Our legal systems are absolutely collapsing across Africa. And one of the things we need to really look in Britain here as NGOs and as being part of this entire ecosystem of wanting to change the world is that today, if you go to Mali, Burkina Faso, Senegal, you go all to these countries, people now are being radicalized. Young people are starting to go on Facebook, on Twitter, they understand what's going to happen. You have all these migrants coming to Italy. In about 10 years' time, we're going to do the same job again, taking pictures of people who's going to be bombing us here in the UK. So what we need to do is be responsible as organization and say, what can we do? How can we put this message out there? How can we change our policies? How can we integrate more? How can we collaborate more to change things? And that is very important right now.
Okay, so who would like to ask a question of this panel? Because otherwise they're going to just keep on carry on talking, so please ask. So we have one down here and one just behind. We'll try and do three. If there's anyone else in that bit of the audience that'd like to stick up their hands. Yep, off you go, Matt.
I just wanted to pick up on, first of all, something Juliana said, but then also to compare it to some things that came across from the rest of the panel, which was, you talked about agency in the creation of images, and of course, we can talk about images, but really we mean narratives in the broader sense. And I was just thinking about sort of the questions that we've been having about appropriate images, and whether or not they have a wider impact beyond perhaps the furtherance of a specific cause that they might be created for. And it just occurred to me that if we're talking about agency, then actually the creator, the person with agency, the creator of the story and the narrative might not be the person with the camera in their hand, really has to be part of that narrative. And that's what slightly worried me about some of the language that Jack was using. And Oxfam, I think anyone in the NGO world, I'm sure appreciates that Oxfam is doing a fantastic job and has the right banners behind it.
So Matt, your question, because...
Yeah, well, it was to sort of ask for a little bit more unpacking of that concept from the panel about who has the agency and whether we have the responsibility to take away agency. Because when it's used by other organizations, the narrative seems centered on the person in the image rather than the person creating the image. And we forget about what that person might have been trying to do.
Okay, and just behind?
I have a really simple, short question. I think along with showing images of poverty, should we be showing images of affluence to balance it out so that people understand when they're hitting the limits a bit? And yeah, that's it.
Okay. Jack, do you want to pick up on the agency question?
Yeah, I'm not totally clear on it, but if it's about people having, telling a story in which people have agency over their own destiny, then that's, well, I feel like Oxfam do that. You know, we work with people and we empower people to fight poverty in their lives. If it's about agency in the creation of a narrative, then I'm not sure, because yes, I believe that it's a very powerful idea, the idea of photographic projects in which people photograph and document their own lives. But as I said, very often our communications are intended to elicit a real response, an active response. And so you could call that marketing, because that's really what it is. In the UK market, it's going to require marketing experts to turn a story into effective marketing collateral. So yes, agency, great, certainly consent, making people aware of how their story will be told, but not necessarily that they will be the storyteller, if that's what you're, I don't know if that's answering. In terms of, I can deal with the other question, yes, images of affluence contrasted to images of poverty, that's what the inequality campaign is really about.
I think we need more compassion now. We need really more compassion on when we're creating all these images. They don't reflect Africa. I've got business people, I've got businesses telling me, Mariam, for instance, the Ebola, when we had the Ebola crisis, many people didn't go to Africa because of the images they were seeing. And we have $26 million being given by the African businesses, a collection of money giving to, and nobody talked about those issues. Nobody talked about the good thing we are doing across Africa. And I think it's time now for us to become responsible. But we need to balance the narratives, the agency, whatever you want to call it. But you know, I know that marketing-wise, if we don't show a poor child in any country, you know, the fundraising money will go down. I understand all the tricks behind the scenes, but we need to start becoming compassionate now around the way we portray, especially Africa, because we've been doing this for 80 years, especially the BBC. We've been showing the wrong images about Africa for a very long time. The only website you can go and find the good things is ODI website in the UK. It's true. It's true.
That's totally true.
So,
Juliana, I just want to pick up images of affluence as well as images of poverty. Important?
Yeah,
no, something I mean, you go out and
very important, but I think that's something that's important everywhere in the world because of the way disparity is going, and so that's not unique to Africa. But I think, I mean, what you're saying raises an interesting question, because I would argue that news per se, because of the nature of news, focuses on bad things and negative images. And I mean, there is a big debate to be had whether that should change or not, but I mean, that's what it is. I think what's, you know, where that gets counterbalanced in Western countries is actually through images of pop culture, of Western countries, the Americans having, you know, well, the second largest after India, movie industry in the world, and so on. So I think we've also got to be careful that we don't sort of mix up two things here, because news might always be about bad stuff. And then the question is, where do good images come from? And who and how should these be generated? And who by?
Okay, can I take some more questions? There's one there, and there's some over here. So one there, one at the back, and one beyond that. So just over here.
Hi, this is, to begin, this is fantastic. I'm really, really enjoying this. It's brilliant, great caliber of speakers.
Are you a puppy-faced NGO person?
I am, but I work purely in climate change. I don't do anything international. My question, I guess, is for Jack, predominantly, in a world, in a market of rural consumers in which we are very short-term, increasingly you face emotional fatigue, and we see lots of images. And yet you know that if you put up a big, powerful image, that it's going to generate more money for some of these issues than if you use a less powerful image. Where morally do you draw the line? How do you kind of play that balance?
Okay, so I think there was a hand up at the back, yes? And
at the front, at the top there.
Yeah.
My question's about accountability and transparency in terms of how these narratives are created and who you're accountable to. Because if you know, whether it's the people making it, if we're using this, who are we accountable to?
Okay, and there was one behind. I think somebody had their hand up behind. Yeah.
Hi there. So my question is, my granddad, he passed away a couple of years ago, age 80, and he wasn't a very talkative man, but he used to tell me as a kid very often, like, listen to me, the future is in Africa. The future is in Africa. This is what I learned when I was a kid at school. And my question is, how close are we to kind of finally realizing that potential that lies in Africa.
Okay, so I think, Nick, it would be good if we could hear you on this. Who are you accountable to when you take a picture?
Well, I think partly there are different responsibilities. I mean, if we take very difficult images, there's a question about dignity and retaining the dignity. Would we want to see ourselves in this particular position? It was very interesting that in Ethiopia once, in this type of situation, I was embarrassed to take the picture because the women were not, for what I felt was the audience that is my constituency, that it was not acceptable. And the women said, and they were dying, this is the way we are, and this is the way you should take the picture. So there are many difficult images that I've had to take, and all I can say is that I try and retain people's dignity in the most undignified circumstances. But, I am someone who is on the sharp end, and I think if you don't go to these fragile and conflict states, then we have no news whatsoever. And to return to what you've said, most of the people I take pictures of would be people who do fall inside the MDGs, and I do take people who are living in very wealthy circumstances, heads of states or whatever, but ultimately what I think most of us are interested in is justice. The people in the pictures allow me to take pictures of them because they want justice, whether it's women in conflict who've lost husbands, who cannot inherit the deeds to their homes. That could be Europe, it can be in Africa, it can be in Asia. Ultimately, I think the constituency for those that are involved in this is to make the lives of those in difficult circumstances better. I don't think about the media who are going to portray those images. Ultimately, the responsibility stops with the people who takes the image.
And Jack, the question to you was, where do you draw the line?
Yeah, good question. There are many lines, and I'm sure eminent photographers and storytellers up here will know that actually case by case, you can draw a line and say, well, you would never compromise somebody's dignity. Dignity is culturally specific, I would argue, and unless you see a photograph, you don't really know if it compromises. What does it mean to compromise somebody's dignity? For some people, it's undignified to show a pregnant woman. For some people, it's undignified to show a woman's face or arms. For others, it's undignified to show someone with their shoes. It's all. You have to feel right about it. You have to invest your editorial judgment on whether or not you are. And the answer is you're accountable to the contributor, and you're accountable to your own values and your own worldview. And so Oxfam has those, and you have to do it image by image. And I think. Very, very often you sign up to codes. There are codes across the sector which say you'll never, you won't show a dead body, etc. And I think, well, that's probably right. News broadcasters might, but so there are lines, and I think I watched a 2-year-old Liberian boy die on camera. He died because his aunt had to carry him for 6 hours to get to the nearest hospital, and he died of cerebral malaria. And his parents begged us to tell his story in a way that would mean that other children didn't die. And the conversation about the dignity of that is an interesting one when you're talking to grieving parents who've lost a 2-year-old boy, the same age as my child at that time. And so suddenly, what is our responsibility then?
But Jack, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
yeah.
You can tell the story, but it doesn't have to be a good story. I always refuse to be a good story for the West. I get so many newspapers calling me an orphan, a mom sold as a prostitute, become a CEO in London, employing 20 people. That's a good story. But I refuse that to become a good story.
So how is that relevant to the example that I just saw?
So we need to, the editors, everybody who's writing stories, especially when you go into Africa, we need to make sure it's not a good story just for the West, for the people who are watching it, but a story that tells people lives, giving them, not dignity, I don't like the word dignity, but giving them power, empowering them, like Al Jazeera does. When we saw the Africa Investigate, that was an amazing story they did there. So, it doesn't have to be a good story, but it has to be a story of somebody, a path, a journey.
Can I just pick up the third question, Binyavanga, was that... accountability question. No, that man's dad had told him some years ago that the future is in Africa. I mean, is that something that you feel like this, the progress that's been made in Africa isn't being adequately reflected?
Yes, but I'll go first back to the accountability question,
Yeah.
because it keeps coming back. And, you know, the question about comedy here is, you know, laughter is that gap between, like, what you see or what you know to be true, or what matters to you somehow, like, and what punctures what has become ridiculous in the gaps. And because of kind of the way the world's been shifting so much, things that were supposed to engender sober faces then become comical and so on and so forth. So now the new one, of course, is kids doing IGCSE in Kenya, my nephew being one of them. Don't ask how we got to be there. But so then they are discussing what they're going to do in gap year and why they want to work for Oxfam when they grow up in Nairobi, right? So this thing, it's like, I don't know how to call it, like an octopus of eating. To me, the whole point about accountability now has just become, with big institutions like this, is their scale. You're just like the tube, right? You're this Save Children Oxfam, you are things so big. So yes, I'm sure, because many things come in perception. We have to get more accountable, then multicultural, then whatever you have to do, but you have to maintain yourself as this thing. And so as marketing becomes more important, our marketing language has to grow better. We have to develop a better language to maintain this status quo of this thing. Now, I can't tell you what to do with it. I think if it works well, I mean, I kind of want my nephew to build a nice apartment in Nairobi. If he does get a job with Oxfam, that's fine, right? But I'm not waiting to see, like, you know, Bangladesh is genuinely, or India, now that it's done, it's in the transition of doing many big poverty shifts, saying, if the wells of Oxfam had not been dug, India would not be here today. I mean, really, really, really. Because when people say impact report, we don't even see the big figures. We don't see the big spending. We just don't. We see the picture you want us to see. The crisis I have always is very, very simple. I'm like talking to somebody who's an ex-politician in Kenya, who's a good guy, who then, because he has international credit for being a Democrat in a bad political system, takes a job with an NGO, and then I'm like, what's your salary? That's my friend, he won't tell me. Because last year he was complaining about MP salaries on public podiums. The budgets themselves are transparent without being transparent at all. I do not know what Britain's impact on us is trying to message me to be nice to Britain, and then use all this bloody cover-up to be like, guys are being fetched off Lamu and being taken off to somewhere else. So you guys, and then you guys in Kenya, you use a term, you call yourself civil society. The guys working at Oxfam will be in a meeting called Kenyan Civil Society, and I'm like, wait, accounting to who? British taxpayer, donor in the Telegraph, who is this thing? So I'm fine. I mean, I understand that, like the tube, you need to continue your thing, but it has no political impact of any meaning to the brown-black world. And I'm happy that you can name individuals that are saved and odd villages that are here, but it's going to be political change that shifts the world, as you people know.
And this question of Africa's future?
I think that we are in, and the globe is, Africa is in a big, enormous transition. And I think the degrees of connectivity, the shifts, the bringing of democracy, so many things are happening. And it's a very turbulent time, but it's a time of change. And I think that for people like me who were brought up at a time when things were there was so much stasis, enjoying the transition, even some of the turbulent aspects of it, because just like you say, media, Al Jazeera, even trying to get the African audience, are being challenged because the kids, little bloggers, the most influential media person is a guy called Robert Alai, who just releases all the scandals on his whatever, and will gobble up all the space and then be on Al Jazeera, because he's the guy who had the scoop, right? So this time, this shifting time is incredible. Something about the anarchy of it has a lot of possibilities and dangers, but for me, that's really what you call movement. Stuff is happening everywhere. It's an interesting time to be on the continent. It's full of adventures, full of possibilities, full of ways to do things, full of crises. but the sort of like sit down and watch paint dry, which I kind of knew in the whatever's, is gone, thank God.
Okay, so we don't have any more time, I'm afraid, for any more questions, but I'd just like to take the chance to thank the panel. Binyavanga, thank you for a really stimulating talk which set the scene for a very interesting and wide-ranging debate. And I'd just like to say thank you for coming from Kenya.
Well,
also to Juliana, Nick, Mariam, and Jack. Thank you very much. And for those of you who haven't seen it, there's the really very excellent photo, voice, and ODI exhibition in the lobby, which I strongly encourage you to see. There's no need to run off. There is orange juice or wine in the hallway. And the opportunity also to buy a copy of Binyavanga's book and have it signed by him, indeed, and just to continue the conversation as well. So thanks very much for coming.